Picture this: milk frozen solid on the doorstep, the coal fire refusing to light, and streets so silent you could hear your own breath turning to frost. This wasn't just winter, this was the winter Britain froze solid. The Great Freeze of 1963. For 3 relentless months, life in Britain became a battle between human warmth and a world turned to ice. And yet somehow, we got through it, with wool socks, stubbornness, and a bit of British humour. It began just after Christmas, 1962. People thought it was just another cold snap, a few days of snow and back to normal. But the snow kept falling. By New Year's Day, temperatures had dropped below -15. Roads vanished. The Thames froze over for the first time in living memory. Whole towns became islands surrounded by white. The BBC called it the worst freeze since 1795. And it wasn't exaggerating. Coal deliveries stopped because lorries couldn't move. Water pipes burst. Milk froze before breakfast. Children woke to find icicles hanging from the inside of their bedroom windows. Not outside, inside. You'd scrape them off just to see daylight. Mothers stuffed newspaper under the doors to keep the draft out. Fathers went outside with shovels and came back defeated. You could hear the snow creak underfoot like breaking glass. And yet, somehow, life continued. Slowly, stubbornly, and very, very Britishly. Britain on pause. The country slowed to a crawl. Trains froze solid on the tracks. Even the mighty steam engines gave up. Their water tanks turned to blocks of ice. Passengers sat shivering in carriages for hours, some overnight, wrapped in newspapers, waiting for rescue. Roads became impassable. Cars simply disappeared under snow. Motorways shut for the first time in history. People walked miles through the drifts just to queue for bread, and sometimes found the bakery frozen shut. And yet, through all of it, life carried on in that unmistakably British way. Neighbours knocked on each other's doors. Strangers helped push cars. And every morning, someone somewhere still made a cup of tea, even if they had to melt snow to do it. Even the postman tried his luck, trudging through knee-deep snow with frozen hands, still wearing shorts. Because tradition is tradition. And in the evenings, when the power went out, families played cards by candlelight, pretending it was fun. And maybe, just maybe, it was. Life indoors, and the smell of coal. Central heating was a luxury. Most homes relied on one coal fire to heat the entire house. Families huddled in the living room, hands outstretched to the flames. Your breath still steamed in front of you, even indoors. When the coal ran low, people burned anything that would catch. Old newspapers, furniture legs, even orange crates. The smell of soot hung in every street, thick, heavy, oddly comforting. At night, the blackout returned. Not from war, but from power cuts. Candles flickered. The only sound, the tick of the mantel clock, the wind and the occasional drip of melting frost. Children toasted bread on long forks over the flames, one side burnt, the other side raw. Mothers defrosted milk bottles in pans of boiling water. Fathers claimed to be checking the fire, usually code for staring at it in silence for 20 minutes. And through it all, everyone wore layers, thick jumpers, scarves, and, if you were lucky, 2 pairs of socks that almost matched. School's out, and so were the kids. When schools finally closed, it wasn't disappointment, it was freedom. Children turned the frozen world into a playground. Snowball fights lasted all day. Sledges were made from biscuit tins, wooden tea trays, and sometimes Mum's best baking sheet. You'd come home soaked, frozen stiff, and grinning. Parents didn't worry about safety gear, they worried about the laundry. Wool socks steamed by the fire. Gloves were stiff with ice. And yet, ask anyone who lived through it, and they'll tell you, best winter of my life. There were snowmen on every street corner, each one slightly sinister by day 2. You'd build an igloo, crawl inside, and swear you were warm. And when the first hint of sunlight appeared, you'd pray the thaw would wait just one more day. The nation that laughed through the cold. Even as pipes burst and coal ran out, humor didn't. Newspapers printed cartoons of penguins in Piccadilly Circus. Radio hosts joked about snowmen applying for ration cards. And in typical fashion, the BBC carried on, calm, polite, completely unbothered. Heavy snow has fallen in most areas, they said. Motorists are advised not to. That was it. No drama, no panic, just stoicism wrapped in understatement. The famous British stiff upper lip, frozen perhaps, but still very much intact. Pubs became meeting points for those brave enough to trek there. Beer was cold before it left the tap, but the laughter warmed the room. If you found a seat near the fire, you stayed there, partly out of comfort, mostly because you couldn't feel your legs anymore. The human cost. Behind the jokes, the reality was harsh. Elderly people struggled to stay warm. Hospitals overflowed with cases of hypothermia and pneumonia. The NHS had never seen anything like it. Doctors trudged through waist-deep snow to make house calls, their bags half frozen, breath misting in the air. Factories shut down, shops closed, and hundreds of thousands were left without work or heating. Britain wasn't just cold, it was still poor. Post-war recovery was slow, and this winter tested every bit of progress the country had made. But even in hardship, there was something unbreakable in the air, a quiet pride that said, "We'll manage." And manage they did. Communities opened their doors to neighbours who'd lost power. Church halls became makeshift shelters, and families who barely spoke before the freeze shared food, warmth, and conversation. Because when the fire burns low, you realize what really matters: people. The frozen sea and silent countryside. Along the coast, the North Sea itself froze solid. Fishing boats were trapped in ice, harbors like mirrors of glass. Inland, rivers froze so thick that children skated on them, entire families walking across surfaces that hadn't frozen in centuries. But beauty had its price. Farmers watched helplessly as sheep and cattle froze in the fields. By the time the thaw came, tens of thousands of animals were lost. It was devastating, but no one complained. They simply got on with it. Because that's what Britain did best: endure quietly, with a sigh and a shrug. Still, there were moments of wonder. Snow piled so high it buried hedgerows and phone boxes. Icicles hung from rooftops like glass swords. And at night, under clear skies, the world sparkled as if covered in diamonds. The silence was so deep you could hear your own heart beating. For a few weeks, Britain looked like a fairy tale: cold, cruel, and beautiful. Escaping the cold, just barely. As Britain froze, something extraordinary was happening across the Atlantic. February 1963. The Beatles recorded "Please Please Me." By the time the snow melted, they were conquering America. It was as if one generation was frozen in the past, while another was breaking through into something entirely new. For most, though, the revolution could wait. For now, the biggest luxury was warmth. Picture houses filled up, not for the films, but for the heating. Church halls opened for soup and shelter. Neighbours who'd barely spoken before shared coal and blankets. It wasn't comfort, but it was community. And in that togetherness, something quietly magical happened. People who'd spent years keeping to themselves began talking again. You'd pop round just to check they're all right, and end up staying for hours. There was laughter, there was gossip, and there was hope, thawing slowly like the frost on the windows. When the thaw finally came. In March, after nearly 3 months, the thaw began. Roads reappeared. Water dripped from rooftops like applause. The first delivery trucks rolled through the slush, greeted like heroes. And Britain, tired, frostbitten, and soot-stained, began to breathe again. When the milk arrived, unfrozen for the first time, people cheered. The post came through, pipes burst one last time, and the air finally smelled of mud instead of smoke. That spring, flowers felt brighter, tea tasted better. And life felt earned. Even the birds seemed to sing louder, as if celebrating survival. Clotheslines filled again. Shops reopened. And by Easter, it almost felt like a dream. A long, white, impossible dream no one would ever forget. The winter that defined a generation. Ask anyone who lived through the winter of 1963 and you'll hear the same thing. It was freezing, yes, but it brought us together. There were no smartphones, no central heating, no delivery apps, but there was resilience. Neighbours checked on one another, families sat close by the fire and actually talked, and for all its misery, that winter became a memory of pride, a story told with a shiver and a smile. Because it wasn't just about surviving the cold. It was about discovering warmth, the kind that comes from people, not radiators. The Great Freeze of '63 wasn't comfortable, but it was unforgettable. It tested Britain's patience, humour, and endurance, and somehow we passed. Because in the end, the cold didn't beat us. It reminded us who we were, a country that moans about the weather, but never lets it win.